Hello, my dear church boys, and welcome back to yet another episode of Saint Robert's Daygame and Dating Podcast. And this week we're doing something similar to what we did in the last podcast episode. Last week we looked at students that were struggling in Daygame. They were very, very hard cases, and there was nothing I could do to really help them learn Daygame. They failed, I failed, depends on how you look at it. Well, but this week we're gonna look at students that they had issues, they were learning Daygame, they were very challenging students, but at the end, they did very, very well. So we're gonna look at differences between the guys that struggle and there is nothing you can do to help them, and the guys that struggle but can still learn Daygame. Last week's episode might have been a little discouraging because, well, maybe you listened to it and you thought, well, damn, I also have strong approach anxiety or this issue or that issue. Does that mean there's no way I can learn Daygame? Well, let's talk about this more. Let's talk about some other students I've coached, and you might realize that you probably have better chances to take control of your dating life than you thought. We will look at 5 different students that I've worked with. Each of them had specific challenges that made it much harder for them to learn Daygame, but you'll clearly see what were the differences in these guys that made them succeed at the end. 4 out of 5 of these guys have been on my podcast before, so I will link to the episodes below in case you wanna kind of look deeper into their stories and understand more about how they overcame these challenges. Let's start with a fairly geeky guy I coached in Riga. This guy had 3 things playing against him. First of all, he was a fairly geeky guy, not in a negative sense, just that he was doing an online business that was very numbers oriented, and he was spending a lot of time in front of computer doing that. So he was a very smart guy, doing very, very good in his business. That was but it made him way more serious than the average dude you would meet, the average day gamer. Second thing he had playing against him was his style. It was very basic, very average, really not standing out, not showing his personality, and having a good style and grooming makes daygaming so much easier. And the third thing was he was very nervous when he was opening. I'm not talking about approach anxiety where a student has problems opening up. He'd had that too, but just when he was opening, he was speaking super fast in a super short sentence. If there is an opener that's like, let's say 3 sentences, he would make it into, I don't know, like 7 words, like 1 sentence, super, super short. He's trying to get the point across as soon as possible. That creative thinking that you need for Daygame was not there at all. So because of that, yes, he was struggling quite a bit. He actually understood that he has some things that will keep him back, that will make like learning Daygame slower. And when he arrived for coaching, he actually told me that he has extremely low expectations, and he said, dude, if I overcome approach anxiety, if I'm able to approach at all, that's gonna be a really, really good start. I'm already gonna be very satisfied. And this is something that actually helped him later. Just as he had 3 things holding him back, he also had 3 things helping him overcome these problems and eventually get pretty decent with women. First, as I said before, he had low expectations, and this is very important. There are some guys for whom Daygame, working or not, in their eyes is sort of the end-all be-all. It's, if Daygame doesn't work for me, oh my god, my life is over, I'll never be able to meet women, and this is gonna be terrible. Or maybe they had to really save up money for coaching, and because of that, the attitude is, oh my god, this has to work, I have to get good at Daygame, this is so important to me. And when students arrive with such attitude, they usually do pretty damn bad. This is one of the reasons why if I feel a student can't afford Daygame coaching, maybe he's asking for discounts and trying to negotiate price all the time. In those cases, I actually advise them not to get coaching, and instead of that, learn remotely, join our private community and online coaching program, do coaching calls and things like that. That's a much more budget option, and you don't have to really kind of commit as hard to Daygame as you would have if you're getting in-field coaching. This guy, well, he was different. He didn't really care whether he does good or bad. This was an experiment. He wanted to see, hey, so is Daygame an option for me? Will it work for me? And because of that, he had a much better vibe. He was much more positive and chilled out during coaching, which is very important for learning. The second thing he did, and this is something I've noticed with students that are very successful in other parts of their life. I've noticed that very successful guys are used to getting coaching. They usually have worked with business coaches for their business, with fitness trainers to get in better shape, etc. So they have a lot of experience with working with experts in some fields. And then when they decide to learn Daygame, they're gonna do what I tell them to do. They're gonna be very, very good students. They're gonna follow the instructions and gonna trust the instructions. And this student was just like that. He understood that, okay, maybe this doesn't make sense. Why would I do this? But then I told him that, no, you have to do this, and you're gonna see eventually that this thing starts working. And this was an example of how we worked with storytelling, where with him, we were using the old school kind of 3 things method. Oh, when I think about accountants, I think about 3 things. Or when I think about people who are from Spain, I think about 3 things. It's an old school tool, but it's still very good for some students. And he was struggling with coming up with good stories and kind of just being relaxed enough in that conversation to come up with spot on a go. And in cases like that, it's a very good idea to rely on these old school typical techniques. They're there for a reason. And when I told him that whatever is the topic that she gives you, even if you don't know absolutely anything about the topic, simply say, oh, when I think about the topic, I think about 3 things, and then just tell 3 things that come to your mind. And there are 2 reasons why this is very important. Number 1 is it creates information gap. And since this guy was in online sales, he understood how important that is. Information gap is where you say, oh, let's use this technique as an example. When you say, when I think about Spain, I think about 3 things. Now, when you have said, I think about 3 things, the girl is curious to know what those 3 things are, and it makes her stay in the conversation. And then if while you're telling these 3 things, you spark her interest in some way, you spark her attraction, then boom, she's becoming more interested in staying in the conversation, and you have much better chances of this ending in a number close or even date or something more. And the second thing is, when he was doing this technique, when he was using this technique, he was basically forcing himself to come up with these 3 things. Now that he has said, I think about 3 things, he's forced to come up with 3 things. And it doesn't really matter if he comes up with absolutely terrible things. That's fine, because the girl will correct him. And that's what we want out of this technique. We want the girl to respond, to start invest, to explain how things really are. And this technique was just one example of how he was very good at following instructions, even when he was struggling with doing that. When I told him, like, okay, this is the challenge you have right now. This is what you have to do to overcome it. And he was basically approaching it like something you read in a book and then you go do it. And it was amazing to see how when he was doing that, he started getting better responses, which in turn made him more relaxed in sets, more able to come up with better stories, better theses, and eventually made him become better and better at Daygame. But here comes the problem. Sometimes when we're doing this thing, if a student has a very negative image about himself and his life, sometimes that can lead to a spiral where while he's learning, he's not getting good reactions yet. That negative that negative feedback kind of reminds him of all the bad thoughts he's thinking about himself, and it kind of leads to this spiral, and students become super robotic, and then it's kind of hard to get him out of that hole. Well, he didn't really have that problem because this guy was living a very interesting life. He's well-traveled, he has done a lot of interesting things, and people like that usually have a fairly positive self-image. So even if they struggle a little bit during coaching, they still know that, well, I'm still a cool dude. Even if this doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. And because of this attitude, they're able to push through and eventually do much better. By the end of coaching, this student got laid. Actually, I think he got laid almost already after the second day of coaching. He then returned back to the UK and got several more lays there. So turns out someone who's fairly geeky, has not the best style, and is very nervous when opening can do good in Daygame after all. And now let's talk about the first student I ever coached in the USA several years ago. And just as the previous guy, this man also had three things working against him. First of all, he had terrible style. Oh my God. Anna, the stylist, was so happy to work with him and really improve his style. He had this, people in the US sometimes have this style of wearing oversized stuff, the jeans that are few sizes too large, the shirts that are way too large, and it makes a young, decent looking dude look like a boring dad from the suburbs, and he was kind of looking like that. The second thing he had going against him was he had very weak opens, and even though I was teaching him to do stronger front stops and really pay attention to that, he still struggled doing that. It was as if there was a block, something stopping him from doing that. And the third thing keeping him from becoming good in Daygame, or not really keeping him from becoming good in Daygame, but the third big kind of problem was this guy had spent close to $800,000 on strippers. So you can assume that he's probably easy to play if he goes for the wrong type of women, and he spent a lot of money on gifts when he was dating strippers and doing stuff like that. So that was definitely something that we can expect to be the problem. This was actually one of the reasons, if I recall correctly, why he wanted to learn Daygame, was he wanted to kind of understand, okay, how these things really work. And he was tired from dating strippers and wanted to kind of get away from that world and improve his dating life. There were two reasons why he actually ended up doing pretty good. One is the very basic reason of having low expectations. He really had low expectations. It was back when I was pretty much starting to coach, and Daygame coaching back then with me was so cheap that the average student didn't really give a fuck how he does during coaching. And I actually later realized that that's a big problem. They're not committed enough. There is this balance with pricing where if it's too cheap, the student doesn't really care, and because of that, he does worse. But then again, if it's too expensive for the student, then he's too obsessed to worry that he has to make it because of the price tag. Well, in this case, back then, coaching was so cheap that he really had low expectations. It was sort of like, hey, dude, like, it's fun to meet you. Let's do this. Let's see what we can do. It was basically just an ability to hang out with someone who has quite a bit of experience in Daygame, has started coaching, I think maybe 1.5 years ago is when I started coaching, maybe even less. I think it was just a fun experience for him. So because of these low expectations, there was no pressure, and that usually makes students perform better. But interestingly enough, the big thing that made it all take a big turn, because he was struggling during coaching because of these weak stops, and that kind of maybe messed with his confidence a little bit. I'm not really sure, but it was in general, he wasn't, he wasn't viewing himself as a cool guy. And as soon as we met, I set him up with my stylist, maybe even we had done it before. And then Anna worked with him remotely by creating the lookbook, and And I think we were doing 5 days of coaching, and after the third day, he went shopping and he completely changed his style. Remember, he was wearing oversized shirts and oversized jeans and looked like like the dad from the suburbs, even though he was, I think around 30, maybe even a little younger. He was younger than me. And then after he changed his style, he looked like a fucking rock star. He was walking in the ripped jeans and like a nice Adidas hoodie, a really, really nice leather jacket. He looked good as fuck. I think he also changed his hairstyle. And when I met him after this transformation, he was walking down the street with this swagger, and that completely changed how he daygamed. He was walking down the street with confidence, and when he was opening a girl, it was obvious that he is expecting her to stop, because look at that guy. And because he had this swagger, it fixed his problem of weak opens. All of a sudden, he had very good stops. He started getting way better reactions from the girls. That gave him more confidence and even better kind of attitude in sets. And boom, everything snowballed, and he started progressing very, very fast. This is why I've made work with my stylist as a part of my coaching packages, because, well, there are 2 reasons guys should make sure they have really good style. Number 1, you do get better reactions if you have good style and if you're well groomed. I've seen it over and over, the importance of that. But the second thing, and this is, I think, just as important, when the student changes his style and he sees that now he looks so much better, it makes them more confident. It makes them behave differently. So instead of working, the old school concepts of inner game and outer game, which people were talking about 5 to 10 years ago, if you look at that, there is no point in trying to change your behavior and having a stronger presence in set and blah, 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 yeah? Instead, change your fucking style, start looking hot, and that outer game stuff will immediately change how you view yourself and how you're behaving in these conversations. This guy did pretty good in Daygame. I think he got laid already during the coaching days. He then adopted his game to work in bars, because that was something that he really liked, and he became very good at bar game and is getting laid all the time with women he meets in bars. I should have titled this student "From Simp to Pimp," from spending $800,000 on strippers to just doing so good in bar game. But okay, now let's move to the next guy, and this is a guy you probably have heard about if you've been listening to my podcast for a while. It's MrMajestic. It's a little bit different story because I never coached MrMajestic in field. We did a bunch of coaching calls instead. But so when we started, how this story starts, this was back in the old group chat where MrMajestic had joined, and he was going out, he was taking action, he was posting a lot, but he was asking, you sometimes have these guys who are asking, they ask a good question, then very good day gamers explain them the right answer, they give them the right answer, they explain everything, and they make sure you really understand, and then this guy 2 weeks later asks the same fucking question, gets the same answers, and then asks the same fucking question a few weeks later. Sometimes these guys, they're just not implementing the advice you're giving them. They're trying to argue about everything. And MrMajestic was sort of like that. He seemed like one of the guys who was really taking action, really going out, but he had a few problems. First of all, he was very deep into the red pill rabbit hole. He had a lot of negative beliefs about women, and we had a few discussions like that with him in a chat. He was, as I said before, he was asking the same questions over and over again. And it came to a point where I was really considering just banning him from the chat, because it seemed like this is a guy who's just not learning. But before doing that, I thought, well, he seems like someone who's really taking action, who's really trying, but something just isn't clicking for him. Maybe it's the red pill beliefs. Maybe he's just not seeing his mistakes, because it seemed like even if he tried to implement that advice, it just wasn't working. So I sent him a private message and I said, dude, like, this is what's happening. I explained what I see. And I said, dude, you have to kind of decide. You've been going at this for quite some time. You have to make a decision. Like, whether, are you going to keep banging your head against the wall if you want? Sure, go ahead, but consider getting some coaching goals, because you can keep banging your head against the wall for like 6 months or whatever, or you can learn much faster with coaching goals. It's your call. I didn't want to push him. I didn't want to do anything like that, but I just wanted to make it sure to him that I don't believe that he's going to learn on his own. And after that conversation, things changed, and I've talked about this with him afterwards, and he made a decision that, yes, he understood that he has a lot of red pill beliefs that are hurting his day game and kind of possible options with women and his kind of possibilities with women. And he realized he had to change a lot. And he basically made a decision, okay, I'm going to change then. What he did is he changed his style and grooming. So he's already a fit guy, but he worked on that even more. He got some tattoos and decided to go that route. He understood that the red pill ideology isn't working for him, so he tried to move away from that as fast as possible. He understood that it's not going to work, and he started doing coaching calls. We actually did many coaching calls with him. I would say maybe around 10 calls, and we were doing them every 2 weeks, maybe once a month, something like that. And MrMajestic slowly changed. He went from this guy asking the same dumb questions over and over again to the guy who was really improving. You could see in his stories that things are really starting to work. Yes, of course, his day game sets in the beginning that I listened to for the coaching calls, yes, they were pretty bad in the beginning, but he was improving very fast. He was yet another example of guy who's very good at taking someone else's advice. If they're paying for it, then like some people tend to take the advice more seriously. So he really started implementing all the advice I was giving to him. Even in a group chat, when he asked a question and a good day gamer told him what to do, how to fix his problem, he took that advice to heart. He implemented it, and it was obvious his questions got better and better. He started telling more and more really good stories, and boom, surprise, surprise, after changing all of this, and by the way, also after completely changing his attitude towards women, because the red pill beliefs very often paint women in a negative light. So he had a lot of negative beliefs, but he got rid of all of that. He started viewing women in a much more positive way. And after changing all of these things, he became a very, very good day gamer. Last time I listened to his sets on a coaching call, I basically asked, dude, what the fuck do you want from me? These sets are unbelievably good. They are incredible. You don't need any more coaching calls or anything like that. Now he has more than 30 day game lays. He's day gaming in a place that's, I would consider it to be a very, very hard place to day game in. He's also gone on several day game trips to Moscow and St. Petersburg and Asia, and he's an inspiration to a lot of guys in our community, that's for sure. He's also one of the advanced members of our private community. He's usually giving very good advice there. And I just really suggest listening to the podcast interviews with him and kind of understanding his story, especially the last podcast episode we did. It's just maybe like 10 episodes before this one or something like that. His story is very, very cool and very inspiring. And you will see how you can kind of flip your opinions, make a decision and become a very, very high level day gamer. As I said, more than 30 day game lays now. The next two stories are somewhat similar because they are about approach anxiety. First, let's talk about an Asian guy I coached in Bogota. his approach anxiety was very, very strong. Sometimes I see cases of approach anxiety that are so strong that I realize that there is no way he will overcome approach anxiety. And sometimes guys come with approach anxiety that they believe is impossible to overcome, but it turns out super easy to overcome. Now, because I don't want to coach guys that I believe have no chance of overcoming their approach anxiety. And we covered this in the last podcast episode of how to understand whether you can overcome your approach anxiety or not. It's actually fairly simple. But with this guy, when I was coaching him, it wasn't clear for me, like, will he make it or not? It seemed like it was very hard for him to overcome the approach anxiety, but I saw that there is a chance, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But and I've done we did several vlogs with him where I was coaching him, and we did remote sessions as well, where I'm sitting in the Airbnb and he's out on the street, and this sort of teaches the student to day game on his own, where I'm not pushing him. It's like a test of, okay, how likely is he to do well on his own? And during these sessions, he was struggling a lot. I really had to push him hard, but that was also partially because he was fairly tired. Coaching sometimes can be pretty intensive, and because of being so tired, he was struggling to overcome approach anxiety. So I wasn't really sure how will this end. But luckily enough, this guy needed two things. First of all, he needed to relax a little bit, or not relax, rest a little bit, because as I said, the coaching was very intense, and then because of that, he was kind of tired. And when guys are tired, sometimes the AA gets worse. But then when he rested a bit, he was doing much better with approach anxiety. He could overcome it. Maybe in the beginning, just do a set here, set there, nothing crazy. And the second thing he needed was persistence, to just keep going out and keep trying. And even though his case was, as I said, I was kind of 50-50 whether he was going to overcome his AA or not, but he ended up getting 5 lays in Bogota. That is crazy. He got, I think, the first lay while I was coaching him. I think, I don't really remember this exactly. But then he had to go away. But when he came back, he closed several more leads, upping the total to 5 lays in that city. And that's a very, very good result. As I said, I did 2 vlogs about his story, and they're linked in the description. So now let's talk about the last case. And this was another guy I coached in Latvia. Challenges he had, what happened after coaching. He was a fairly young guy, and yes, while he had approach anxiety and his stops were fairly weak, he was pretty okay with dealing those things. We dealt with the approach anxiety pretty fast during coaching. His stops became pretty okay. His storytelling was good. Everything in his sets was working, I would say, pretty good. But then we quickly realized that, yes, while I'm next to him, he's able to overcome approach anxiety, but he was struggling super hard on his own. Remember, this was back when I pretty much started coaching, so I hadn't made kind of integration sessions part of coaching and things like that, because right now, first of all, we work on approach anxiety before the student arrives for coaching, and we're doing several integration sessions after coaching, which means we finish coaching and either I go back to my city or student goes back to his city, and then we do 2 more sessions where we're doing a session remotely over a WhatsApp call where student is out day gaming on the streets, but I'm in his ear between the sets, kind of seeing how he's doing, making sure he's able to day game on his own. Back then, I was not doing these things yet. But seeing how strong this guy's approach anxiety was, it was really also one of those 50-50 cases where I was not sure whether he would make it or not. But I gave him very clear instructions on what he should do to overcome approach anxiety on his own, how to kind of start slower and then build up to more and more sets, and the guys in the chat were helping him. So he had very clear instructions with what to do, and what is very important, instead of improvising and coming up with his own ideas, he just took these instructions, went out, and implemented them slowly. It did take him some time, because sometimes overcoming AA on your own, if you don't do things like integration sessions, sometimes it's pretty hard. But over time, he was able to approach pretty much any girl in any situations as he started doing better and better and better. And the last time I talked to this guy, he had 8 Daygame days. Well, that's it. These were the 5 stories I wanted to tell you today, guys. And I hope now you have a better understanding of, what are the chances that you would do good at Daygame, because all of these stories were very similar to the guys that I talked about in a previous podcast episode where I couldn't help them. But here, there were always some differences. Maybe that was just living a more fulfilled life, where you have better vibe. Maybe that was low expectations. Maybe that was just trusting your coach, listening to what he tells you to do and just following these instructions and learning that way. Whatever it was, I hope you saw something that gives you a bit more hope. And well, if you like these stories and you're thinking about getting coaching, then you can click the link in description to find all the details. You'll find everything about how coaching usually works, approximate pricing, etc. And then if everything sounds good, you can apply for a free call where we will talk about a bunch of things. First of all, I have to get to know you a little bit, because I don't do group bootcamps or any kind of copy-paste nonsense like that, because everyone needs a different approach. So I like to know the guys that are thinking about getting coaching to understand what's the best approach to coaching them. Then we'll go over all the questions you have about coaching, how coaching usually works, etc., etc. Well, and if everything sounds nice, then we will talk about where could we do this and when. That's it, guys. If you have any questions about Daygame or about your journey in Daygame, what you should focus on, you can ask them in our private community and online coaching program. Link to find out all the information about that is in the description. That's it. See you guys next time. Ciao, guys.